everyone. My name is Mike Minutoli, and welcome to our Yale SOM Finance Admissions Student Panel. We're excited to have you with us today. We've got some great panelists here to share their experience at SOM, and we look forward to taking some of your questions. My role here at SOM is on the career education and coaching team. We're a group of folks within the CDO, the Career Development Office, that work very closely with students on their career goals, help them get set up to meet with employers and engage. And we're one half of the team. There's about 10 of us that do that work and another 10 that are employer partners. And they work very closely externally with many of the employers that are looking to hire students and talent from SOM. So excited to share a little bit more about that. Today, we're going to speak with our students panel here about finance as a whole. I would say the focus will probably be a little bit closer to investment banking, as our 3 students did investment banking internships, but they're also involved in other clubs and activities across the school and the university, and they could share a little bit about that. But as we jump in, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, maybe a quick where you're from, where you studied prior to coming to SOM, and maybe a little bit about your career also before you came here. And maybe we'll start with James.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. Hi, everyone. I'm James Moellner. I'm from Southern California originally. I went to UCLA for undergrad, and right after graduation, went to the Army. I worked there for 6 years as an infantry officer, stationed kind of all over the world. Decided it was time to make a pivot to financial services, and an MBA was the right way to do that. So that's why I ended up here at Yale. And yep, that's it.
Great, thanks. We'll go to Aditya.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mike, for introducing me. I'm Aditya. I also go by Adi. I'm from India. Delhi is where I was born and brought up. Did my undergrad in economics, studied actuarial science for a bit, did a master's in liberal studies from Ashoka University, and pivoted to social impact consulting. And then I pivoted again to join the VC ecosystem in India. Worked at a venture debt fund for a couple of years, and joined the Yale School of Management for the MBA program. I interned at UBS in their investment banking team, and excited to talk to all of you.
Great, thank you. And finally, we'll go to Servando.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Servando. I was born and raised in Mexico. Similar to Adi, I have a background in economics. I studied at ITAM in Mexico City. My entire professional career has been in the renewable energy space, and that has taken me around. I started in Mexico, then went to Chile, ended up in Portland, Oregon, right before coming to SOM. And I knew that I wanted to pivot into the financial services side, but keep within the energy space. So SOM helped me do the transition. Over the summer, I entered at Bank of America in their natural resources and energy transition team. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Great, thanks for introducing yourself. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I have a couple of canned questions here that we'll walk through just to get a general sense of what's happening. I know a couple of you have submitted questions before joining us today. We'll do our best to get through all those, but you can also use the Q&A feature to ask any other questions you might have, and our admissions team will pass those through. Again, we'll do our best to get to all, but we want to make sure that you hear the highlights of our students' experience. So we're going to start with a very, hopefully an easy one. But why did you choose to join SOM? And maybe we'll throw it to Servando to start off.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So my sister actually graduated from SOM, so I visited her while she was studying here. And that really was a big variable in my decision-making process. I knew the type of people that came to the school. I felt the big sense of community, and I really enjoyed the business and society motto that Yale has to offer. And besides that, I knew that I wanted to make this transition to the East Coast, where New York is very close to the New York is the financial capital of the world, and Yale is close enough. And I knew that it would provide me with the resources necessary in order to make that transition. So for me, coming to Yale was like a very easy decision, both from like a professional path, and I knew that this was a place where I would feel comfortable and fit in.
Excellent, thank you. Adi, would you like to share?
Yeah, two major reasons. One, I wanted a very strong global brand name, which is recognized not just in the US, in other countries, but also in India. And that was one reason. The other reason was uh, I've I've worked in the social impact space in India for 2.5 years. And even though I don't want to work in the social impact space professionally moving forward, I really appreciate uh, people who engage with the topic, who appreciate social impact along with working in as corporate and business jobs as possible. And with SOM's mission around business and society, it just really resonated with me, where I got the best of both worlds. And yeah, I've like over the past more than 1 year, I've just really enjoyed engaging with people around both aspects of business and society.
Great, thank you. And James.
Yeah, for me, it came down similar to Adi for the strength of the brand, but also the size of the program. And so for me, I knew I kind of wanted to end back on the West Coast where my family's from. And having a brand like Yale at the business school that I went to really helped me open doors, even with employers who we don't necessarily have alumni at. And I think that is my experience. I didn't mention this earlier, but I worked in Los Angeles last summer in investment banking at Perella Weinberg Partners. And, I was the first Yale hire for them. But I, was easily able to get in the door because of, kind of the reputation of this program. And that was really important to me. And then secondly, the size of our program relative to some of our, competitor schools and all the other great programs that are out there is more intimate and smaller. And I think for me, in my experience in the military, I had worked on very large teams and large organizations as well as smaller ones. And I always found that I performed well in the smaller groups, got more out of it, and was able to have a bigger impact. And that's certainly been my experience here over the last, year and a half. So those are probably the two driving things that made me choose Yale over the other schools.
Okay, that's great. James, I was wondering if I could put you on the spot for a moment and maybe give like the 1,000-foot view of recruiting for investment banking at SOM and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah, of course. So first and foremost, it's very structured. When you show up to an MBA program like Yale, recruiting is the first thing that happens for investment banking. So we start right away in September and you're done in December. So it's a pretty quick accelerated process in your first year right away. And the reason I say structured is it helps a lot knowing that if that's right away, like you're not having to just figure it out on your own. So every single aspect of the process in terms of how to make initial outreach to bankers, how to make a good impression, how to nail your interviews is something that we focus on in the finance club and using the resources of our career development office to make sure that the new class is equipped to be successful right out the gate. But more or less from a high level, it's a process of you figuring out what the different banks do, what's going to be a good fit for you, and learning more about the industry over a process of coffee chats and informational interviews that culminate in Super Day interviews and offers early December.
Great, thank you so much. Servando, I was wondering if you could share a couple of the questions that came in beforehand and are now coming in as well. Are kind of, is it possible to pivot to investment banking with kind of fill in the blank background? I've seen education, I've seen family business, I've seen technology. Just kind of curious of your thoughts on how you would answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think investment banking is a prime industry for career switchers. I mean, just like spitballing here, but I would say like 60% of our recruiting cohort were career switchers with varying degrees of involvement in the financial services world. I myself didn't come from the financial services world, and all my work had been at most like financially adjacent. But I knew that, like the process was very structured, as James mentioned, and that the finance club and also like the CDO, excuse me, would provide me with the necessary resources in order to successfully recruit. And the investment banking industry as a whole is so accustomed to take in these career switchers that once you get to the internship, there is extensive training in order to get you up to speed with the financial aspect of things, and then also marry the industry expertise that are required for investment banking.
That's great, thanks. Adi, Servando mentioned some of the resources that are available to students in this space. I'm curious what resources you took advantage of around Yale in your recruiting process.
No, definitely a lot of resources from the finance club, from the CDO side. Things like higher SOM events where, you know, career bankers would come, we would have an opportunity to interact with them, you know, get conversations going, get subsequent coffee chats with them to initiate the process with, you know, all the banks that are out there. Apart from that, we'd have days on Wall Street where we'd have the opportunity to go and visit the banks and actually visit the floor and see, you know, what the day-to-day looks like, have conversations with more bankers. And, you know, just how the recruitment works in banking is that, you know, they really want people whom they've had conversations with, they have confidence in terms of the kind of interactions they've had. And I think with these kind of events, it gives them plenty of opportunity to get to know us. It gives us plenty of opportunity to have these kind of conversations and, you know, just take the whole recruitment thing forward.
Okay, great. And for those of you that, I'll just add a quick plug on the DAOs, which is Days on Wall Street. So that's usually 2 or 3 Fridays in the fall, in October, where our team, along with the club, kind of arrange for visits. And sometimes you're going to 4 or 5 banks on a Friday, and doing all the things that Adi talked about. So it's kind of a live in person. You're in New York City for an entire Friday engaging. Great opportunity. One of the questions that came in, James, was about coffee chats and kind of how often they are in person versus how often they are virtual. I'm curious how often you found yourself going to New York City and how often you're able to handle things from home or Evans Hall.
Yeah, it's a great question. We do get it quite a lot because of our proximity to New York. I think it ultimately is more up to the student and how they want to craft their recruiting experience than the banks. Typically, we do recommend that if you can go in person at least a couple of times, we think that's a great opportunity to show interest in a bank, but also for you to get a read on if that's a place that you'd want to work. But I still think the majority of recruiting, especially those initial coffee chats, happens virtually. And that's a function of when COVID changed a lot of the norms and people just got used to it. And it's a little bit more convenient for people to just take calls from their desk when they have so many to do. But also, I think we have class and there's a lot of things that you don't want to miss out on here. And so students will tend to strike that balance that allows them to, you know, be involved in clubs, attend all their classes, and still find time to go into New York when works for their schedule. So if that's something that, you know, is front of mind for you and it's really important that you get into the city and you want that in-person feel, then you can certainly do that. But it's not something that I feel is required to be successful through the process.
Well, that's great.
I'd like to make one plug there though, that you know, Yale School of Management is in a unique position where the proximity to New York is so close that it does give us an opportunity to decide whether, you know, we'd like to go in person, we'd like to do virtually. I think, you know, a lot of other schools, because of the location, it becomes a challenge where the option is not there. For me, I tried to do all my chats in person, just try to make that connection with the bankers. And I was able to do that at a few banks, and I really enjoyed that opportunity.
That's great. Servando, I'm going to pass this question to you. And the question is about, I'm going to put this in quotes, do the elite boutiques, i.e. Evercore, CVP, Lazard, recruit at Yale SOM? And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, certainly. I think, well, perhaps this question is better suited for James, but I'll take a pass. So to James's point, Yale has such a strong brand name that we pretty much get access to any and every bank on the street, whether it's an independent advisory or a bulge bracket. And the recruitment process for both of them is largely similar, where it's very structured. They come, they do their corporate presentation here at Evans Hall, and then they initiate the recruitment process, indicating how to start coffee chats with junior bankers. And then through informational interviews, you move along the process and end up getting first round technical interviews and then super days that then turn into offers. I would say that, again, largely similar to the recruitment process for bulge bracket, but Yale definitely gives us access to both elite boutiques and the bulge bracket banks.
James, anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, sure. Just to add some specific color, last summer we had people work at PJT, Moelis, Evercore, Lazard, Perella Weinberg Partners. I might have missed one in that bucket. And then this year, all those same employers are recruiting with us as well as Centerview Partners. So I think that pipeline is definitely there and is continuing to grow. And to Servando's point, it really is a question of fit. And that's one of the good parts of the recruiting process here is you get exposure to all the different types of banks. You get the boutiques, the bulge brackets, middle market banks, and feel out what you're most interested in. For me, I ended up going the boutique route, but there's a lot of good reasons to go to different banks.
James, I'm going to come back to you. I'm sorry, but there was a question about recruiting for cities outside of New York. So kind of curious if you could share anything about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was, I would always get that question from employers when I was talking to them in LA. They'd say, well, we have business schools here in LA. Why'd you go to Yale? So you have to be ready with that question. But beyond that, I think there's a few things that Yale does structurally that help you. One, as I mentioned before, the brand just kind of gets you in the door. But two, there are several other students in the year ahead of me who had done something similar. And so I had that one-on-one mentorship with second-year students who had navigated a similar, if not identical process the year before. And that just kind of helped me have a roadmap on how to approach it. For the most part, what happens is you'll first be introduced to a bank here on campus. They'll come do a presentation. You express interest in recruiting at a different location, and then their HR department will connect you with that other office. So you're not just left on your own to cold email these banks. And then beyond that, you do the majority of your recruiting virtually. And if possible, I do recommend making an effort to attend in person their offices the same way you'd want to in New York. And so I navigated that by flying out twice to Los Angeles, once just kind of on my own, and another I just used, I was going home for Thanksgiving anyway to see the folks, and just threw in some recruiting on top of it. So there's a lot of different ways to manage it. And I think the coursework here, particularly in the fall, is very, very manageable. And there's no classes on Fridays, and all those kind of elements make it very doable to travel for recruiting if that's something that is important to you.
Great, thank you. Servando, I was curious if you, so I don't know that we mentioned this earlier, but both James and Servando are leaders in our finance club, which does a great job of preparing students on a weekly basis. But Servando, I was hoping maybe you could walk some of the perspectives through the club's involvement in their prep, maybe from like club kickoff through interviews.
Yeah, certainly. So the club meets bi-weekly. It meets on Tuesdays and on Sundays. So every Tuesday session is more on the structural component of the recruitment process. So we give guidance on when the corporate presentations are happening, what is the type of protocol that should be followed, how to send emails, how to send thank you notes, how to engage in coffee chats. And then on Sundays, we have our technical sessions, right? So the recruitment process for investment banking is highly structured, and it has two main components, the behavioral and the technical. So the finance club largely is involved in preparing the students be very adept in both characteristics, right? So again, on Tuesdays from the get-go, we start giving feedback to the students on how to prepare for informational coffee chats, what type of questions that they should expect. And as the process moves further along and the coffee chats start to become a little bit more technical or behavioral questions start to become more difficult, then we are also equipped to prepare them to be successful in that regard.
Fantastic, thank you. So maybe we'll take a breather from the process for a moment. I'm going to throw a question to Adi. Adi, there's been a couple of questions about recruiting for roles within investment banks that aren't necessarily M&A related, or also buy-side opportunities, hedge funds, private equity. Just kind of curious if you had anything to share on students who are recruiting in those spaces.
Of course, I think I can talk about private equity and venture capital a little bit. I'm one of the leads of the PVC club here at Yale SOM. Very honestly, I think when it comes to private equity, the kind of skills and experiences they require prior to your MBA are very unique in the sense that they require banking experience. They require core finance experience that they can cultivate into something and eventually give you like a private equity role. So I think that's where the opportunities get limited for people who don't have the required experience. And apart from that, I think when it comes to international students, because of the visa sponsorship issues and the number of sponsorship opportunities that private equity funds provide for international students are again limited. So that's where sort of the barriers come in when it comes to private equity. When it comes to venture capital, I think Yale School of Management has recently um, you know um, recently started offering students to partake in semester internships, which I think will be a big boost for people who want to break into VC. It's been started this year, and a lot of international students are reaping benefits from that change. And I think moving forward as well, you can see that VC opportunities will increase from whatever the numbers are right now. That being said, I think networking and a willingness to sort of show your passion around VC and startups, having knowledge around that is something that becomes the most important. It is not as tough to break into VC as opposed to private equity. There are, I think, still more funds who are ready to sponsor visas for international students. So that becomes a bigger opportunity. However, the number still remains low, and that's more of a structural issue around the funds, which not something that anyone can do about or any school can do about. It just comes in as it is. But with if you have the required experience, if you have the right skills, if you can network well and just show your passion for the industry, I think there are opportunities. However few, it's doable, and we've seen a lot of our batch people do it as well.
Okay.
I
And
won't be able
just,
to speak about hedge funds, but yeah.
I think it's a pretty similar story in terms of, networking and finding your path. James?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. I think I agree with everything Adi said. For me, private equity is definitely an area of interest, and I don't have the finance background without the time spent in banking to recruit for it. But what I've been able to do here at school is take a lot of dedicated private equity coursework, and it's led by practitioners who are currently, general partners in funds in in the private equity landscape. And so, regardless of the fact that my near-term career path out of an MBA is to go into investment banking, if private equity is something that I'd be interested in pursuing in the future, already I've been able to make a lot of connections in that world just by nature of being here and taking some of those courses. So I think it's definitely a path that's open to you, if not right away, certainly down the line.
Great, thank you. And I want to just mention one thing that Adi had just mentioned. In the last month, SOM faculty approved a course that will now allow, as part of the course, second-year MBA students to partake in international MBA students to partake in internships in semester. And so that's something that, again, visa restrictions was not allowing in the past. But now it makes it a lot easier for students to engage in that. So it's a kind of a new change here, almost maybe in the last 2 weeks. It's a great opportunity for students to partake, but it's for second-year MBA students. Servando, I'm going to throw a quick question to you. One of the questions was, how quickly do I need to know that I want to recruit for investment banking when I join?
Sure. Absolutely immediately. No, just kidding. I think that there is definitely a time frame where you need to get on the train or you're not on the train. As James mentioned, the recruitment process starts very early in September with corporate presentations happening, banks coming to SOM, and then, initiating the coffee chat process. So, I mean, roughly, I would say that you have to make a decision whether you're committed to the investment banking recruitment process as early as probably early to mid-October, the latest. Because at that point, there's, different parts of the process that will differentiate people that have been in the process and people that are trying to just get into the process. So I would say roughly by the beginning of October, folks should have already made a decision on whether they're committed to banking or not. That being said, I think that, like first years get to campus pretty early, like mid-October. And then there's a lot of resources that are offered by the clubs. So there's club fairs, there's club kickoffs. And in order for you to get familiarized with the industry, if you're not familiar with it, and then, make an informed decision on whether this is a path that you want to follow.
Thank you. One of the questions, I think we've kind of touched on it a couple of times here, but just wanted to clarify. So we are one of a small group of schools that actually do our investment banking interviews in December. So the first week of December this year, many of the banks will be interviewing our students. A lot of other schools continue to interview in January. And so just an FYI that is typically the process that we find here at SOM, is the opportunity to interview a little bit earlier in the time frame than some other schools. Certainly decisions to be made based on what's happening there. Some banks still recruit in January and do their interviews in January, others in December. But just know that is maybe one thing that can be a little different from some of the other schools that our interviews do begin in December. I wanted to throw a question to Adi, and I'm curious, Adi, what your thoughts are. A question came in about, can I recruit for finance and also other things at the same time?
Okay, so it's a difficult question to answer because I think it's unique to everyone. I actually did do that, where I did recruit for banking and consulting, which is a terrible combination to do together, to be very honest, in hindsight. But I do think in hindsight I did that, and that is the advice I'd give to everyone, that you need to decide which one do you want to prioritize more than the other. I prioritized banking more than consulting, while I did get opportunities to interview in both career choices. My priority was with banking, and that's where I sort of saw success eventually. So I think you can definitely try for multiple career choices at the same time. Depends on on you how much you want to sacrifice in terms of the other numerable opportunities that the school has to offer in terms of social interaction, in terms of classes, in terms of just learning from the faculty and your batchmates. And if you feel that you have the time to actually do multiple choices, like, please go ahead. But I think prioritizing one over the other is something that, like, I'd advise everyone.
I'm going to go back to James for a minute. James, you mentioned a couple of courses that you were taking, and I'm going to actually go around to each of you to see if you have any advice, whether those courses are at SOM or around the university as a whole. But any specific courses that you would mention that you feel like have been really impactful as you kind of move forward in your career?
Yeah, I think there's two. One of them that stands out is the Intro to Negotiations course. It's taught by two of the professors here, who are both academics and practitioners. One of them is like a world-class poker player, and another has been like a serial entrepreneur in the CPG space. And the experiences they bring into the classroom are extremely engaging. It's very like an anecdotal and practice-based course. And it totally changed my perception of how a successful negotiation is structured and how to approach it, kind of like with a theoretical framework that does differ here at Yale to a lot of the programs out there. That's like a proprietary thing that, they've developed here. And I think that's really a special part of the first year. And then I think the second one would be the course I alluded to earlier, is Introduction to Private Equity course, really small class size, so limited to 45 to 50 students. And it's taught by a, general partner of a fund who brings in other general partners every week. And at the end of each lecture, they take, whoever wants to go out to a dinner in New Haven. And so you go from having a small, intimate class size to a really small, intimate, dinner opportunity to ask whatever questions are on your mind about the industry and also make those direct connections. And so having access to that as a first year student before I'd done, any banking experience over the summer whatsoever was extremely helpful. And I got a lot out of both of those.
Maybe I'll jump down to Servando.
Certainly. Just to clarify, these are only first year classes, right? Or
Whatever courses you've
okay,
taken, I'm okay with
perfect.
that.
All right, so I'm gonna say two of them, and the big advantage that I see in Yale is like the classes that are cross-listed with SOM are absolutely fantastic. So in my second semester, I took a class called Renewable Energy Project Finance, and it's a very famous class here at SOM. It's taught by Dan Gross, and he is like pretty much the guy that invented renewable energy project finance, and he is a former banker. He worked at Goldman Sachs, and now he leads Amazon's Climate Pledge Fund. And the class, it was super helpful for me to hit the ground running during my internship, because it is largely how renewable energy projects are modeled in the real world. So I could actually see from the classroom to the internship the level of applicability, a level of rigor that was available to me through the class. And then the second class I'll mention is the class that I just came out of. It's called Economic Evolution of Latin American and Caribbean Countries. And this is a class that is also cross-listed, but is cross-listed with Jackson, the School of Public Policy. And it's taught by Ernesto Cedillo, which is a former Mexican president. And it's just like incredible to get his insights as you're going through the readings and basically the different moments in recent Latin American history, and to understand growth and development from that perspective. So I guess just like the level of access to the faculty is incredible.
That's great, and that's a new one I've not heard before, so excellent. Adi, any courses that you are taking?
Yeah, I'll talk about a couple of courses. The first one was in the fall semester, called State and Society. It's taught by Professor Mushfiq and Professor Shapiro. One is from Bangladesh, the other is from South Africa. They both bring in a different lens around how state interventions and how state interacts with the society, how you can sort of bring business into the picture, but at the same time, the state and society lens becomes very important. And I think this is a class which is maybe a little unique to School of Management, where, like I mentioned at the start, that it's a school which appreciates the society aspect, and these kind of courses really bring that mission into practical sort of course curriculum. I really enjoyed having that kind of lens. The second course I'll talk about, actually a couple of courses taught by Professor A.J. Wasserstein. I think he's one of the best professors I've learned from so far. And I think the kind of his courses are Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition and Leading Small and Medium Enterprises, the two that I've taken so far. I think very practical, very to the point around how to lead small and medium enterprises, which a lot of us would like to do, in the near term or long-term future, and having the exact skills required to sort of make decisions in a very engaging class style. And I've been loving those classes so far, and it's been great. Looking forward to his couple of courses next semester as well.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. So there's a question I'm going to open up to anyone who wants to answer. I'm curious, based either on your own experience or on the experience you've seen of colleagues. There's been a couple of questions about partners. So curious about involvement of partners while you're a student, but also then more specifically, if I do have a partner, if I do have a family, how do I navigate investment banking, recruiting, the life, and what should I be considering in the background? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump on this, but if anyone does, feel free.
I guess I'll take this one as the married guy on the call. I've been married for almost 6 years. Came here with my wife, who works full time, and that was a really important consideration for me. There are other schools that we looked at together, and I feel like as a married couple, we definitely made this decision jointly, and part of it really was my wife had the impression, and fortunately, it's been an accurate impression that this is a school that really values the input of partners. And there's a few ways, kind of tangibly that Yale does that. One, you're able to audit courses. So if you're not working, you can actually enroll in courses and learn while you're here, along with your partner who's enrolled full time. Another is just all the extracurricular activities. So the parties, the social events, the wine class, anything like that, yoga classes are open for enrollment to partners as well as students. And so we've both been able to take full advantage of the resources here at Yale. And as a result, it's just been a super beneficial experience. Um, I I think that a portion of that question is, embedded in it is like time management, prioritization, things like that. How do you juggle all that with a partner? For me, I think it definitely is not possible to always prioritize all things at all times. And so in the fall, when recruiting was the focus, that was definitely a conversation I had with my wife, and she was very supportive and understood, the time commitment that would take. But since that recruiting period passed, and it is, right away in the beginning, um, the opportunity here to fill our time, as a couple with ways that we find meaningful is incredible. There's no class on Fridays. There's plenty of breaks for trips and opportunities to travel internationally, as well as, do things with all the great people that we've met here. So I really can speak highly to the experience of being here, as a married guy, and I, hope she's probably listening right now, but hopefully, I'll get off this call and my wife won't disagree with anything I just said as well.
You are recorded now, so it's all
Yeah,
there.
right.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. I'm going to pass a question to Servando. One of the questions that came in was just maybe not necessarily directly related to the recruiting piece, but what opportunities exist to hone leadership skills at Yale on a whole, whether that's in the classroom, through extracurriculars, through other activities? I'm just curious. There was a couple questions regarding that topic.
Sure. I think that first of all, the core curriculum itself, helps people develop their leadership skills. Right up from the outset, you are put into managing groups and teams, for example, right? Which is a crash course on how to handle like a small group environment, and you put in difficult, say, like hypothetical situations and how to manage that, right? Also, you are put into learning teams, large and small, that you have to basically do assignments, homeworks, and all sorts of stuff during the core courses. So that also helps you develop the skills. That said, I think that the most valuable resource is basically the involvement of the clubs and the club's importance in broader like Yale SOM, right? So as you mentioned, Mike, James and I are leaders in the finance club. I'm also a leader in the energy club. And I think that just the level of trust that the school puts into the clubs helps you become a very better leader. And I think that is, a skill that is developed through practice. So I would point to those two things, right? More on the, I would say, institutional or academic side, where you actually have like exposure through lecture, but also on the practice side, where you have, like basically free reign on what you do with the clubs.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you sharing. Adi, just wanted to confirm, I know you mentioned a little bit about the process for PEVC earlier. Someone was asking for some of these less structured paths, such as, did that process look similar to IB recruiting, or is it a separate effort?
No, I think it's very different from the IB recruitment process, because investment banking is a very structured process. There's a lot of information that flows directly from banks to CDO, or the banks to the finance club as well. When it comes to PVC, it is literally everything needs to be done by the student. Yes, CDO will facilitate some conversations, some opportunities that come their way, but a lot of it is built on networking, which is done primarily by the student. This from the last couple of years, and especially this year, the PVC club, which I'm a part of, we're really trying to sort of impart a lot of these um, networking sort of know-how, in the sense of how to go about it, how to structure your conversations, how to sell your story, how to reach out to people, uh, just doing a lot of knowledge transfer around what the PEVC roles look like, what kind of skills and requirements are there. And I think that's where a lot of knowledge transfer happens. But at the end of it, it still remains an individual effort where networking becomes a big thing.
Great, thank you. We do need to begin to wrap up. We have one final question for our group, but I think everyone has class at 1 o'clock, so we want to give everyone time to transition over. There was one question that I'll very quickly answer, but there was kind of the idea of, if I have a long-term interest and I know that banking is maybe a step in between, how can I use my 2 years at Yale? And I would say, from my standpoint, recruiting is very busy. Your first semester will be, a lot of your time will be taken, as everyone has mentioned, for the recruiting process. I think if you are successful and you have an opportunity to take a little break, when you come back in the spring, don't just kind of rely on the fact that you have an offer, but start to work on what courses can I be taking, who could I be connecting with, what network can I drive with the next year and a half, if my recruiting is quote unquote over. Getting involved with clubs and conferences, getting involved with coffee chats that are more to the future, so that those 3 years, 4 years after graduation, you can point back and make that pivot and say, yes, I went into banking, but if you look at my resume, everything I did when I was in business school was pointing to this move over to renewable energy, to private equity, to whatever is next. So I think that's the biggest thing, is not necessarily just, you get a great offer in December and you just kind of, wrap up your stuff and go home. But continue to engage in the school and everything that it has to offer. So from a last question, as I do, again, everyone needs to get to class. Any advice that each of you has for candidates preparing to apply? And is there anything that you wish you had known when you were in their shoes? And Adi, I'm going to start with you. Sorry to get you in the thinking void.
Yeah.
Crazy face there.
No, I think I'll talk about two things. One is really try to understand the culture at School of Management and see if that culture aligns with you. A lot of times people think about rankings, people think about the brand name, and they don't really put what their lives are going to look like for the next 2 years into the picture. And I think having some thinking around that is really beneficial. And the second thing I'll talk about is, I think it'll be more tangible in terms of application stuff, wherein I think people try to force fit things in the application and not really answer the question, the essay question. And I'm a student ambassador as well. And what I advise anyone that has a conversation with me is that, first and foremost, try to answer the essay question. Don't force fit anything, and just try to show your true self. And that is what will get you over the line than anything else.
Great, thank you. Servando, I'm going to pass over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I gave just very great advice, but I think as you're thinking of your application, of course you're coming to Yale SOM, but also think about what other opportunities are available at broader Yale. I think that the university has so many resources that would become available to you. So definitely, this may be just like a corollary to Adi's point, like you're gonna be here for 2 years. Think about how you're gonna be here for 2 years, not just within the SOM bubble, but the grander Yale picture, and how you can take advantage of all those resources and then be part of the community and contribute to it.
Thank you. And James.
I think the number one piece of advice I would recommend for admissions is to visit the campus in person if that's available to you. Admissions puts on a variety of events throughout the application process, both on the front end, before your application is due and before you get accepted, and also after you've been accepted. They do a really comprehensive admitted students weekend. And there's great benefits to going, both before and after. I personally went in person for an interview, and that gave me a really strong sense of, what the school is about, who was there, what would my life look like really if I came to school. And that was helpful for me. I think it gave me a little bit more color to perform well in the interview and ultimately get accepted. But really the valuable time to come is after you've been accepted and when you're trying to make a decision, because alongside you on those weekends for admitted students are the people that you'll be friends with potentially and work and potential colleagues and the people you'll spend your time with in business school that really make the experience what it is. And that was a huge selling point for me when I came to the admitted students weekend and we went out to bars and we were talking to each other. Hey, are you going to accept it? Are you actually going to come here? And all the people that were like, yes, I'm sold on Yale, I'm coming here, were all the people that I was hitting it off with. And I think that was just a really strong sense of reassurance that I made the right choice and I was going to be in the kind of community where I would be able to flourish.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, to our three panelists, I really appreciate your time. Addy, James, Servando, I hope you have a good 1 p.m. class without your break today. For everyone, we appreciate your questions. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, please reach out to our admissions team, our student ambassadors. There's a lot of great questions here that we just couldn't get to today, but thank you for your time and attention. And hopefully one day down the line, we'll see you here in New Haven and Evans Hall. Have a great day, everyone.